النبيين وإمام المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما. اللهم اغننا بالعلم وزدنا بالحلم وأكرمنا بالتقوى وأتمنا بالعافية. Continuing with our recitation and interpretation of the Qur'an by Imam Ghazali, we have just two chapters or two sections left, dealing with the same topic on the meaning of interpreting the Qur'an according to one's own opinion. And most of it is self-explanatory, so we'll be reading, and if there's anything that needs to be explained, then we'll comment, inshallah. So Imam Ghazali then starts the next section saying the real reasons for prohibition of Qur'an explanation according to one's personal opinion. As for the prohibition of explanation of the Qur'an by personal opinion, it is for one of two reasons. One of them is that the person given an explanation has an opinion of his own on a matter, and this opinion is influenced by his nature and passions. So he interprets the Qur'an according to his own opinion and passions in order that he may adduce an argument in favor of his purpose. So it means he comes to the Qur'an with an ulterior motive. He has an opinion on a certain issue, and we spoke about this before. So he comes looking in the Qur'an for proof for his opinion. Whereas one ought to come to the Qur'an with a blank slate and see what are the meanings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends for you to take from it. If he did not have that opinion and that passion, that meaning would not appear to him from the Qur'an. This happens in different conditions. For example, sometimes it happens despite the knowledge of the Sharia, as in the case of a man who adduces an argument from a certain Qur'anic verse for validating his hearsay, bid'ah, knowing well that this is not intended in the verse, but by doing this he seeks to confuse his opponent. Sometimes it happens to a man ignorant of the basic principles of the Sharia, but since the Quranic verse can be interpreted from two or more perspectives, his understanding inclines to that perspective which suits his own purpose, and that aspect is given preponderance by his own personal opinion and passion. Thus it turns out that he has explained the verse with his personal opinion. That is, his personal opinion is that which has led him to that explanation. If his own opinion did not exist, the perspective which suits his purpose and not the other would not bear such a weight with him. And so, for example, a woman who says there's no such thing as hijab in the Quran, she'll take the same verses which talk about hijab and she'll interpret it in her own way, whereas the verses were revealed for hijab. And many other examples like this. Another example, sometimes a man has a valid purpose for which he seeks a proof from the Quran, and he adduces a proof for that purpose with a verse in which he knows that purpose is not intended. An example of this is a man who invites people to pray for forgiveness of Allah just before dawn, and who adduces an argument from the words of the Prophet ﷺ, eat a meal just before dawn, for there is blessings in this meal. He gives the impression to people that the intended purpose of this saying of the Prophet is remembrance of Allah just before dawn, knowing full well that the purpose really intended by the saying is to eat food just before dawn. Another example is the man who invites people to strive hard against the hardness of the mind. He says that Allah ordered Musa alayhi salam, idhab ila fir'auna innahu tagha. Go to Fir'aun, he has indeed transgressed grievously. And hinting at his own heart, he says this is what is meant by Fir'aun. So we find people, they want to look for metaphorical interpretations. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Musa alayhi salam, go to Fir'aun, he has transgressed, they say Fir'aun is the heart. And they might deny even that there was even something like a historical figure by the name of Fir'aun, whereas we know that a historical figure by the name of Fir'aun did exist. So another time, for example, people, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. None will touch the Quran when Allah speaks about the Quran except those who are pure. So this person says, no, what is intended here is the purity of the meaning. You have to come to the Quran with a pure heart. It doesn't matter if you don't have wudu, you don't. So this person is ignorant of the Sharia. So he's coming to the Quran with his own personal opinion. This kind of Quranic explanation is sometimes employed by some religious preachers for good purposes by embellishing their speeches and encouraging their audience to this purpose, but this is forbidden. Sometimes the Shia Batanis employ this kind of explanation of the Quran for corrupt purposes in order to deceive people and to invite them to their false school of thought and practices. This is the time of Imam Ghazali. To support their corrupt opinions and false school, they bring down the Quran to certain matters, knowing definitely that these matters are not meant in the Quran. So they have some interpretations of verses that the Quran is talking about one thing, and they interpret it by meaning completely something else. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغي يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان. The big interpretation, this is Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Fatima and Sayyidina Hassan and Hussein, because the verse is not talking about anything in that regard. These three kinds of explanations then constitute one of the two reasons for prohibition of Quran explanation by personal opinion. The intended meaning of personal opinion would be the corrupt personal opinion suitable to one's own passions and not the correct personal effort. Personal opinion includes that which is valid and that which is corrupt. And that which is affected by passion is sometimes specified with the name of personal opinion. The second reason for the prohibition of Quranic explanation by personal opinion is that this prohibition applies to one who hastens to explain the Quran by considering the outward aspect, that is, the rules of the Arabic language, without knowing by heart what was heard from the authorities and transmitted from them, in the cases of those verses which use strange Quranic words, and in the case of those verses which ambiguous terms and substitute words occur, and also in the case of those verses in which they are to be found conciseness, omission, suppression of words understood, precedence of a word from its proper place, and putting a word at a place later than the appropriate one. All this has got to do with the Arabic language and the beauty of the Arabic balagha. So if a person doesn't know how the Prophet ﷺ interpreted these verses and the Sahaba interpreted these verses, he'll look at the verse and he'll make up his own mind according to his own knowledge of the Arabic language. One who, without being prudent at outward commentary, hastens to elicit deep meanings by mere understanding the rules of the Arabic language, he makes many mistakes and is included in the group of those who explain the Quran by personal opinion. Then transmission from an authority and hearing from him are necessary for outward commentary first, so that the exegete may by them be safe in places where mistakes are likely to be made. After this, understanding will be wide and the eliciting of deep meanings will be possible. So we spoke the other day about the Arabic grammar in the 7 verses of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the orphans. And in this particular verse, there is a preposition that is omitted. And depending on how you interpret that preposition, the meaning can be in one thing. And if you interpret the preposition as being something else, it could have the complete opposite meaning. So one of those verses is in Surah An-Nisa. وَيَسْتَفْتُونَكَ فِي النِّسَاءِ. They ask you about women. قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ فِيهِنَّ. Allah will guide you, or Allah will give you the fatwa with regards to that. وَمَا يُتْلَى عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ فِي الْكِتَابِ. And what has preceded, what has already been revealed in the book. فِي يَتَامَ النِّسَاءِ اللَّاتِي. With regards to the orphans of women, لَا تُؤْتُونَهُنَّ مَا كُتِبَ لَهُنَّ. That you have not given them their dowry. وَتَرْغَبُونَ أَن تَنْكِحُوهُنَّ. تَرْغَبُونَ أن تنكحون. The word رغبة in Arabic means, what does it mean? We can't say what does it mean unless we have, you can say رغبة في means to incline towards something, and رغبة عن means to disincline from something. This Quranic verse doesn't have neither في nor an. It just says وترغبون أن تنكحون, meaning it can be interpreted as ترغبون في أن تنكحون or ترغبون عن أن تنكحون, meaning that you have a desire to marry them or that you don't have any desire to marry them. Which interpretation ought to be given? And this is why we have the science of tafsir, and we have the science of usul al-fiqh, and we have the parameters on which the Quran can be understood otherwise. And this is why also, if someone doesn't understand Arabic language, and just from English translations we think we know the meanings of the verses, we have a lot to still learn. Because even the Arabs that read sometimes these verses, especially when it comes to the ahkam and the laws, they won't even know the meanings of this. They've got to go to tafsir. And so the Arabic language is so vast that within the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one verse can have many different interpretations. Just because of one word being left out, you can interpret it as being in one direction, and if you interpret the preposition as being something else, a completely different direction. What does that mean? What does that mean? Who can tell me? We have to know the language, but we have to take our knowledge from our chains. Whose interpretation? Everyone claims to follow the Quran and the Sunnah, but whose interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah are we following? And this is why the importance of the chains of narration. That this interpretation is what such and such a scholar has said, or my teacher has said, who took it from his teacher, from his teacher, from his teacher, going all the way back. And if it is something new that has come to a person's heart, it also has to fit within the broader scope of the knowledge that has come down through these chains. Transmissions from an authority and hearing them are necessary for outward commentary first, so that the exegete may by them be safe in places where mistakes are likely to be made. After this, understanding will be wide, and the eliciting of deep meanings will be possible. So you can only get to the roof if you climb the ladder, you start from the bottom. But someone wants to get to the deeper meanings of the Quran before even understanding the apparent meanings. It's like trying to get to the roof without a ladder. The strange words of the Quran, which can only be understood by hearing directly from authorities, are many. We should like to indicate a number of them so that one may seek information about this type and know that it is permissible to neglect the memorization of outward exegesis first. There is no coveted object in reaching the inward knowledge before being prudent at the outward. One who claims to possess understanding of the deep meanings of the Quran without being prudent at its outward commentary is comparable to a man who claims to reach the upper part of a house without crossing its door, or claims to understand the purpose of the Turks from their speeches, whereas he does not understand the language of the Turks. This is because outward commentary occupies the place of learning the language which is needed for understanding. And then when we're learning the language, we spoke about this before, in Syria, for example, the student will spend up to 10 to 15 years only learning the tools for interpretation. So he'll learn Arabic language, nahu, sarf, okay, grammar, syntax, eloquence, and then he learn usul al-fiqh, Islamic legal theory, and then he learn balagha, and he learn all these. They won't learn Quran and tafsir immediately. What we've heard from some of the scholars in Syria, only after they reach the age of 30, they are allowed to actually study the Quran and the Hadith directly. Meaning they spend half of their lives just preparing themselves to be able to study the Quran and the Sunnah because of the vastness of the language. And if you look at the books that they study, it take a good 5 to 6 years just to study the books with Arabic syntax. And in addition to that, they'll study the books on etymology and all the different sciences of the Arabic language. Then usul al-fiqh, okay, then mustalah al-hadith, and so these are not, they call these the ilm al-ala, the knowledge tools. They are just tools. They are not yet what we are seeking, but they enable us now to approach the Quran. Several Quranic subjects in which transmission from authorities on Quranic exegesis is necessary. There are many Quranic subjects in which hearing directly from authorities is necessary. One of them is conciseness by omission and suppression of words understood. And most of this now is going to be talking about the Arabic language. First, we'll have to understand Arabic to basically understand what Imam Ghazali is trying to explain here. We'll try and make it easy, otherwise we'll just read the chapter for Barakah so that we can complete the book, inshallah. One of them is conciseness by omission and suppression of words understood. Example of this are as follows. Allah saying in the Quran, وَآتَيْنَا ثَمُودَ النَّاقَةَ مُبَصِّرَةً فَظَلَمُوا بِهَا. Its meaning is آيَةً مُبْصِرَةً فَظَلَمُوا بِقَتْلِهَا. So the verse in the Quran says, we gave Thamud the she-camel as a clear sign, but they did wrong to themselves by killing it. The man who looks at the outward rules of the Arabic language imagines that the intended meaning is that the she-camel had eyes and was not blind. He also does not know by what the people of Thamud did wrong and whether they did wrong to others or to themselves. وَآتَيْنَا ثَمُودَ النَّاقَةَ مُبَصِّرَةً فَظَلَمُوا بِهَا. So for example, this in the Arabic language, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the descriptive word, a person might not understand. He might be thinking that the description is referring to the camel, whereas the description is referring to the ayah, to the verse where Allah says, وَآتَيْنَا ثَمُودَ النَّاقَةَ. Now, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَاشْرَبُوا فِي قُلُوبِهِمُ الْعِجْلِ بِكُفْرِهِمْ وَأُشْرِبُوا فِي قُلُوبِهِمُ الْعِجْلِ بِكُفْرِهِمْ. Allah says in Surah Baqarah that because of their disbelief, their minds were filled with love of the calf. Whereas what is meant, Allah says in this verse, فِي في قلوبهم العجل. But what is intended is حب العجل. Because of their disbelief, their minds were full to the love of the calf. The word حب is omitted. Another example of that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, إِذَا لَأَذَقْنَاكَ ضِعْفَ الْحَيَاةِ وَضِعْفَ الْمَمَاتِ. The meaning is ضِعْفَ عَذَابِ الْحَيَاةِ وَضِعْفَ عَذَابِ الْمَوْتَى. The meaning is, if you had inclined, Allah speaks to the Prophet ﷺ, if you had inclined to the infidels but a little, we would have afflicted you with the intensified chastisement of those who are living and the intensified chastisement of those who have passed away. The words al-ahya and al-mawta are substituted by al-haya and al-mawat. And all this is permissible in the local language. And I think most of these examples, now the rest of this chapter just talks about these examples. I don't think we need to read it because one needs to have a grasp of the Arabic language to understand it. So we'll just skip that and come to where Imam Ghazali says, this and cases similar to this are included in those Quranic subjects in which only transmission and hearing from authorities are of avail. The Quran from its beginning to its end is not devoid of this kind of thing because it was revealed in the language of the Arabs, and so it included various characteristics of their speech such as conciseness, prolongation, suppression of words understood, omission, substitution of one word by another, and occurrence of a word before or after its proper place, so that it may be able to silence the voice of the Arabs against it and be fully eloquent to them. Anyone who is content with understanding the outward aspect of the Arabic language and who hastens to explain the Quran without knowing by heart the meanings transmitted from the authorities in these Quranic subjects is designated as a man who explains the Quran by his personal opinion. Such an explanation is he understands the best known meaning of the term ummah, and so is naturally inclined to this meaning when he finds the word used in a verse. But when he finds it in another place, he's inclined to this well-known meaning which he heard and understood from authorities, and abandons a thorough study of the transmission of its many meanings. Perhaps this is what is prohibited by the Prophet ﷺ and not the understanding of the deeper meanings of the Quran, as has already been discussed. When hearing from authorities is achieved in these and similar Quranic subjects, then one has mastered the outward commentary of the Quran, which is merely the translation of its words. This, however, is not sufficient for understanding the reality of the meanings of the Quran. So that if you have a translation of the Quran, Imam Ghazali says that's still only the first step. There are still meanings beyond that which a person needs to access. The distinction between the reality of the meanings of the Quran and its outward interpretation can be understood from an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. That you, O Muhammad, did not throw the handful of gravel at the infidels at their faces when you threw, but Allah threw. And you did not throw when you threw, but Allah threw. The outward commentary of this verse is clear. Its real meaning, however, is obscure because it affirms throwing and negates it at the same time. And these appear contradictory unless it is understood that he ﷺ threw from one perspective and did not throw from another. And that from the perspective which he did not throw, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threw. So Allah says, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ. You did not throw when you threw, but Allah threw. Okay, there are deeper meanings in this. And there are complete tafsir which allude to some of these deeper meanings. There are complete tafsir that have been written which talk about just these deeper meanings of the Quran. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَاتِلُوهُمْ يُعَذِّبُهُمُ اللَّهُ بِأَيْدِيكُمْ. Fight them, Allah will punish them at your hands. When it is they, this is the believers who are the fighters, how can Allah be the one who inflicts punishment? If Allah is the one who inflicts punishment by moving their hands, what is the sense in commanding them to fight? The real solution to this problem receives help from a vast ocean of forms of knowledge obtained through mystical intuition. And this is why Imam Ghazali wrote his Ihya al-Muddin. He says the knowledge attained when the spiritual veils or when the veils have been lifted. So in this case, outward commentary is of no avail. This solution consists in knowing first the mode of the linkage between man's works and the power created in him, and then the mode of linkage between this power and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that after the clarification of many obscure matters, there will be unveiled to him the truth of his words. Of the meaning of the verse, you did not throw when you threw, but Allah threw. This is what they call al-fana. Okay, where they see that their actions also proceed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The pious don't even see their own actions as coming from themselves. When they do good deeds, they don't even look at themselves and think, I'm doing the good deed. They say, Allah is the one that has done this deed. At Allah has manifested this action on my limbs. I myself have done nothing. If one's entire life is spent seeking the unveiling of secrets of this meaning and that which is linked up with those matters which precede and those which follow it, one's life will perhaps be exhausted before fully knowing all that follows in that meaning. A study of the real meaning of every sentence of the Qur'an needs a duration like this. Part of the secret meanings of the Qur'an is certainly unveiled to those established in knowledge. In proportion to the abundance of different forms of their knowledge, the purity of their souls from vices, the fullness of their motives in pondering over the Qur'an, and their isolation for seeking its meaning. Meaning they would go into seclusion to recite the Qur'an for months and months on end in order to extract the meanings. For each of those established in knowledge, there is a limit in rising to a great height. As for the full unveiling of all the secret meanings, there is no coveted objective in it. If the ocean were to become the ink and the trees the pens for transcribing the secrets of Allah's words, which have no end, all the oceans would be exhausted before the words of Allah came to an end. From this perspective, men differ in understanding the secret meanings of the Qur'an after sharing the knowledge of the outward commentary, and it is necessary to understand this outward commentary first. It's just one page and then we can end. An example of this is the understanding of a certain Sufi, Ba'd Arbab al-Qulub, from the words of the Prophet ﷺ during his prostration. I seek the protection of your pleasure from your displeasure. I seek the protection of your forgiveness from your punishment. And I seek the protection of you against you. I am unable to praise you, you are as you have praised yourself. The Prophet ﷺ commanded, or he was commanded, wasjud waqtarib, prostrate and achieve nearness to me. And when he attained this nearness during prostration, he considered the divine attributes and sought the protection of an attribute from another. Pleasure and displeasure are two divine attributes. Then when his nearness to Allah increased, including in itself the first nearness, he rose to the divine essence and said, I seek the protection of you against you. The first, Allah said, A'udhu bi ridaka min sakhatik. I seek protection in your pleasure from your displeasure. This was his level of closeness in having the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unveiled to him. And then the stage higher from that, he said, I seek the protection of you, I seek the protection of your forgiveness from your punishment. This was also so there's the attributes of Allah, the actions of Allah. And then he said, he went higher and he said, I seek the protection of you, I seek your protection from your own self, meaning from your punishment. Then when his nearness to Allah increased further as a result of a thing which he felt ashamed to seek protection, being on the bed of nearness, he took refuge with praise, saying, I am unable to praise you. Then when he realized that this was a shortcoming, he said, you are as you have praised yourself. These are thoughts exposed to those possessed of purified souls. This is the perfect Sufis. They have further depths which consist in understanding the meanings of nearness to Allah and its specification with prostration, and understanding the meaning of seeking protection with the divine attributes from another, and the meaning of seeking protection with him against him. Jalla Jalaluhu. There are many secrets here, but outward commentary cannot guide us to them. They are not opposed to outward commentary, rather they complete it and constitute the essence of the Qur'an as opposed to its external aspect. They form that which we arrive at for understanding the internal meanings, not that which opposes the external meanings, and Allah knows best. The book of rules of the Quranic recitation is complete. Praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. May peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the last of all prophets, upon every creature selected from everyone of the worlds, and upon the family of Muhammad and his companions. And may Allah send salutations upon them. This book will, if Allah wills, be followed by the book of invocations and supplications. Allah is the one to be asked for help, and there is no Lord besides him. And with that, we come to the end of the book of Imam Ghazali, which is a portion of his Ihya Ulumuddin. Alhamdulillah, thank God subhanahu wa ta'ala for bringing it to completion. We haven't read the whole there's the one section we haven't read. For Barakah, if you guys want to, maybe tomorrow we'll just read it so we know we read the whole book. I haven't skipped out anything. What do you guys think? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك. اعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العصر ان الانسان لفي خسر. الذين امنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.